First Post and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. A new Cold War is unfolding as we speak. It was triggered by an unlikely source, a seemingly innocuous balloon. Tonight we have some disturbing developments to report. The world underestimated the threat from that Chinese balloon. New revelations have emerged. These balloons are part of a vast aerial surveillance program, a multi-year campaign by the Chinese state to gather intelligence from rivals. The program is run by the People's Liberation Army. So far, they've targeted countries all across the world, including India. This week, the U.S. briefed its partners in Washington, D.C. Indian officials were part of that meeting, we're told. On Vantage tonight, we'll get you all the details. Also on the show, L'Oreal is facing lawsuits in the US. We'll tell you why. And the UK's crisis of faith just got worse. Now God is at risk of losing his gender. All that and more coming up in the next 60 minutes. First, the headlines. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is in the UK, the first such visit since the war with Russia began in 2022. The Sunak government has announced a fresh round of sanctions on Moscow. No respite for Sri Lanka anytime soon. President Ranil Wickremesinghe says the island nation will remain bankrupt for at least another 3 years. South Korea's parliament votes to impeach the country's interior minister. This is over a Halloween crowd crush in Seoul last year, the one that killed more than 150 people. China's cross-border travel hits a 3-year high as COVID restrictions are fully lifted for tourists from Hong Kong and Macau. More than 600,000 trips were made on Monday, a 33% jump from the previous day. And LeBron James overtakes Kareem Abdul-Jabbar as the most prolific scorer in NBA history. He's broken a 39-year record. The Los Angeles Lakers star, playing in his 20th season in the NBA, passed Abdul-Jabbar's long-standing total of 38,387 points. We start tonight with the Chinese spy balloon. The butt of all jokes on the internet, the driver of memes on social media. How can you spy with a balloon? The world asked. 1 week later, it seems the joke is on us. Turns out the balloon is no laughing matter. It is part of a vast Chinese surveillance program. And wait till you hear how many countries and regions it targeted. Colombia, Costa Rica, Vietnam, Taiwan, Japan and India. Yes, even India. China has tried to spy on India using these balloons. There have been sporadic reports. We investigated, we tried to connect the dots, and this is what we found. On Monday, the United States organized a briefing. It was led by Wendy Sherman, America's Deputy Secretary of State. You could call her their Deputy Foreign Minister. She held a briefing. Sources say officials from 40 embassies in Washington, D.C. were called, 40. Among them were representatives from India. Why was India part of this conversation? Well, 2 reasons. Number 1, New Delhi is an important security partner for Washington, D.C. And number 2, balloon-like objects have been spotted in India too. Look at this picture. It emerged in January last year. Where is this from? It is believed to be from Port Blair, the capital of Andaman and Nicobar Islands. It was flying at a very high altitude. Some panel-like objects were seen hanging. Does it look like a spy balloon? Actually, scratch that. Let me ask you this. What is a spy balloon? The world is still trying to figure it out. As for the object spotted over Port Blair, the reports do not say very much. What we can tell you is that it did raise suspicions, especially because of where it was found. Port Blair is a key military outpost for India. Both the Indian Army and the Navy have a presence there. Why is Port Blair important for India? Because it is strategically located. Important trade and shipping routes pass through Andaman and Nicobar Islands, so Port Blair can be used to keep an eye on Chinese activities. Now back to the balloons. The pattern is somewhat similar to what we saw in the US. There, the balloon was spotted over Montana. America has nuclear missile silos in this region, which is why what happened in the US is of interest to New Delhi. When the Americans briefed their international partners, Indian officials were present in the room. What were they told? That these spy balloons are part of a PLA program, an espionage program of the People's Liberation Army, the Chinese army. It's hard to say when the program began, but the US believes China has conducted dozens of such missions since 2018. A part of this operation is run out of Hainan. This is a Chinese island. The PLA is believed to have a base there. What kind of base? It's a naval facility. Reports say the Hainan base is home to China's J-8 fighter jets. It is also home to some of these balloons. But why balloons? Why is China using balloons to spy? The PLA sees them as a useful tool for intelligence gathering. And they make sense for multiple reasons. Number one, balloons are cheaper to make. Number two, they float in the air. Their path is difficult to predict, so they're more difficult to track. And number three, they can fly between 60 to 80,000 feet, the same altitude as commercial jets. And from that height, they can hover over a target for hours and gather more intelligence. These balloons are well equipped. They have digital cameras and radio signal and satellite transmission capabilities. Basically, everything that you need to spy. Some analysts believe that they can be operated like drones, that these balloons can be flown remotely, controlled remotely. So they may not look very high-tech, but they do pose a threat. And here's the scariest part. China can deploy and control these balloons from within its borders. Wendy Sherman, the U.S. Deputy Secretary of State, is said to have mentioned this during the briefing. Reports say she referred to an incident from 2019, another balloon sighting. The U.S. says this too was a Chinese balloon, a Chinese spy balloon. In 2019, it circumnavigated the globe, meaning it floated all around the globe. American forces prepared a report about this last year. It was titled People's Republic of China High Altitude Balloon. It refers to that incident from 2019. The balloon rose to an altitude of 65,000 feet and drifted past Hawaii and across Florida before continuing its journey. What about the balloon in Montana? American officials have recovered the debris. Reports say a team from the FBI is analyzing it in a government lab. So we could know more about this in the days to come. American lawmakers will also be briefed about it.
Having them come down over water is a huge advantage than having them come down over land. Because over water, much of the surveillance balloons stuff can be recovered. So we're going to know what it is, and we're also going to know what they've sought. And even as the balloon came over the southeastern part of the United States, we were monitoring it very, very carefully to see what the Chinese were picking up and not.
And how is China taking all of this? After the initial half-apologetic notes, China is doing what it does best, being belligerent. Let me tell you about their latest demand. Return the balloon, they say. China wants the U.S. to give back the burst balloon. China's ambassador to France has given an interview. The Chinese embassy in Paris shared a transcript, and I have a copy of it. Listen to what they said. If you pick up something on the street, you should return it to the owner if you know who the owner is. If the Americans don't want to return it, that's their decision. This demonstrates their dishonesty. The moral lectures are touching. China's foreign ministry reminded Washington that the balloon belongs to Beijing.
The balloon doesn't belong to the United States. China will continue to uphold its legitimate rights and interests.
It always cracks me up when China talks about legitimate rights, and their brazenness is amazing. They may be running some fancy spy programs with balloons, but we'd like to tell them about the first rule of espionage. Don't get caught. Also, forget about getting that balloon back. As for India, we're still curious to know what New Delhi made of the balloon over Port Blair and what they did about it. We're not done with the story. Expect more in the coming days. Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden has delivered his annual address. It's called the State of the Union. The president addresses a joint session of the U.S. Congress. The Congress is America's legislature, like their parliament. It has two houses, the Senate or the upper house, and the House of Representatives or the lower house. The president addresses both, and he does it every year. It's a chance for him to talk about progress and plans, what's been achieved in the year gone by, the progress, and what's planned for the year ahead. The phrase State of the Union is self-explanatory. The United States is a union, and today Joe Biden declared that the State of the Union is strong. Listen in.
So I've come to fulfill my constitutional obligation to report in the State of the Union. And here's my report. because the soul of this nation is strong, because the backbone of this nation is strong, because the people of this nation are strong, the State of the Union is strong.
Quite a thundering applause there. Joe Biden outperformed himself. He knows he faces a tough election next year. Americans are not particularly inclined to vote him back to power, and the White House knows this. So Biden needed to put up an A game during his State of the Union address. The Republicans heckled him. The president went off script. He sparred with them, all during the address. Well, he can spar with the opposition all he likes, but how will he convince the voters? 65% of Americans believe their country is on the wrong track. These are the findings of the latest Reuters Ipsos poll. 65% are not happy with the trajectory. Last year, this number was 58%. What about Biden's personal approval rating? Just 41%. That may not be enough for him to win the presidency again. His political fate will be decided by the American middle class, so he reached out to them today to allay their fears.
Under my plans, as long as I'm president, nobody earning less than $400,000 will pay an additional penny in taxes. Nobody, not one penny. Well, let's finish the job. There's more to do.
The tax carrot. It always works, or so the politicians of the world think. Biden also spent a lot of money on Ukraine last year, and he plans to spend more. The United States is Ukraine's largest financial and military donor, more than $50 billion and counting. Here's what Biden said about Russian President Putin.
I spoke in this chamber 1 year ago, just days after Vladimir Putin unleashed his brutal attack against Ukraine. A murderous assault, evoking images of death and destruction Europe suffered in World War II. Putin's invasion has been a test for the ages, a test for America, a test for the world. Would we stand for the most basic of principles? Would we stand for sovereignty? Would we stand for the right of people to live free of tyranny?
What about China's aggression? Has Biden proven that he is not weak on China? Remember, that was a charge against him. Listen to what he said today.
I'm committed to work with China where we can advance American interests and benefit the world, but make no mistake about it. As we made clear last week, if China threatens our sovereignty, we will act to protect our country, and we did. Look, let's be clear. Winning the competition should unite all of us. We face serious challenges across the world. But in the past 2 years, democracies have become stronger, not weaker. Autocracies have grown weaker, not stronger. Name me a world leader who changed places with Xi Jinping. Name me one. Name me one.
Now, that was quite a spirited takedown of China, and it earned Joe Biden bipartisan applause. But the president was booed too. That's when he accused the Republicans of trying to do away with Medicare and Social Security. All in all, a 72-minute-long speech, lots of issues covered. He took on big oil and big tech. He tried to shame Republicans for not allowing him to raise the debt ceiling. He vowed to veto any national abortion ban. He also called for a total ban on assault weapons, on guns. It makes for a good speech, but it makes no difference on the ground. Calling for a ban is not enough when gun terror continues in the U.S. He's the president, for God's sake. He cannot always plead helplessness. He claimed to have created a record 12 million jobs in 2 years, something that no other president has done even in 4 years. Biden said the economy is recovering, that inflation is going down. But some of these claims are misleading, if not outright lies. Take the economy, for instance. The U.S. has hit its debt ceiling, $31.4 trillion. That's how much debt they've had. If the Congress does not raise the ceiling, America will face a default. What is Biden's solution? Raise the ceiling. Not to cut down the debt. It's a temporary remedy, and it's not really a solution. Then there's inflation. It has come down to 6.5%. You know what America's target is? 2%. And the Biden administration has no clue how to get there. It tried to control energy prices. In the process, they ended up severely depleting America's strategic petroleum reserve. When Biden took office, the U.S. had 638 million barrels of oil. Last year, it came down to less than 400 million barrels, the lowest in 4 decades. And there's no controlling guns. He keeps passing the buck to the Congress. We've said enough and more about this in the past. the gun terror in the U.S. The president has failed on immigration too. He hasn't been able to secure American borders. He deputed Kamala Harris to deal with this. She's struggling. Police brutality is hitting new lows. Racism remains a burning issue in the U.S. It should have no place in today's world, let alone the so-called first world. And we haven't even begun with his foreign policy failures. Balloon fights with China, war with Russia, no nuclear deal with Iran, snubbed by the Arabs. This is the State of the Union. Biden may describe it as strong, but the world sees it for what it is, a mess.
حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل ومجربين طالعه من هون يلا بس طالعوا واطلعوا ايه تمام ver azar Muhammed Yusuf. Yavaş 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 yavaş. Yavaş 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 yavaş. Allah'ım. Yavaş 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 yavaş. Hoppa. Amcam. Amcacığım. Gel.
It's been over 2 days since earthquakes wreaked havoc on Turkey and Syria. The death toll has crossed 8,000. The world has stepped up relief efforts. Multiple countries are sending rescue teams. India is among them. This is in addition to humanitarian aid. The focus is on rescue because this is a race against time. Many are still trapped under collapsed buildings. In sub-zero temperatures, people can only survive beneath the rubble for so long. Rescue efforts are being delayed due to the weather, and in the case of Syria, due to geopolitics. Every second wasted will lead to a rise in casualties. And yet, amid the tragedy, there are stories of hope and miraculous rescues. Our next report brings you more.
This is what has changed in Turkey. These are aerial shots before and after the earthquakes. Look at the extent of the damage. Buildings flattened and people trapped under the debris. Entire neighborhoods have collapsed in the affected region. The first earthquake took place before dawn. Most people were asleep in their homes. Hospital buildings with patients collapsed as well. This one is in Iskenderun in southern Turkey. 15 patients were trapped, waiting to be rescued.
But doctors said that there are about 15 people here, including the patients. At the moment, they're all trapped inside. Nobody can go near the building. Only one cabinet is supporting the third floor. We are waiting for the heavy machinery to help. Everywhere is destroyed. The machinery is coming from the nearby cities. We will try to remove the rubble.
Search and rescue specialists are coming to Turkey from around the world. India, Pakistan, China, Taiwan, and the US have all sent personnel. Many nations have sent rescue dogs. Russian troops stationed in Syria have been engaged in rescue work. This is being called a race against time. How long can people survive under the shattered buildings, inhaling dust and debris, with no food or water? Locals are volunteering to help. They're desperate to find traces of their families, friends, and neighbors. Many have been trying to move the debris with their bare hands. Amid these images of death, destruction, and tragedy are stories of miraculous rescues. A story that's gone viral is about these Syrian siblings. They were trapped beneath the rubble for 17 hours before they were rescued. While authorities were pulling them out, the 7-year-old girl was seen using her hand to protect her little brother's head. This occurred in Idlib, Syria on Tuesday. A family was trapped under their collapsed home. A crowd surrounded the white helmet rescue workers while they pulled out the family. They erupted into cheers as the family was taken to an ambulance. A 3-year-old was rescued from near the epicenter of the first earthquake. While being taken to the hospital, he was called the hope of the city.
Güvenç apartmanında 3,5 yaşındaki Arif Kağan'ın şu anda canlı bir şekilde çıkarıldı Arif.
In another Turkish city, a mother and child was saved in the early hours of Wednesday, about 47 hours after the earthquake. The rescue workers cheered when they pulled out the pair. Locals and rescue workers celebrate the victories and mourn the losses. Most situations are a mix of both. This little girl was born beneath the rubble. Miraculously, she survived, but her family did not.
The girl was having seizures when she arrived. Apparently, she was born 3 hours before being found under the rubble. According to her temperature, she was born around 12 o'clock in the afternoon. Her mother gave birth under the rubble, and all her family had died. We received her from a neighbor.
The child suffered some injuries, but doctors say she was stable. The human costs of the earthquakes are staggering. UNICEF fears that thousands of children may have died. The World Health Organization believes 23 million people, including 1.4 million children, have been put at risk. What happens to the survivors? This includes people who were not injured during the quakes but lost their homes. They will need shelter. Humanitarian assistance will be critical, especially in war-torn Syria.
Numbers do not tell us about the perilous situation that many families now face, having lost everything, forced to sleep outside in the middle of winter. It's now a race against time. We're especially concerned about areas where we do not yet have information. Damage mapping is ongoing to understand where we need to focus our attention.
People are surviving in temporary shelters. This tent city has come up in Malatya, Turkey, to house those in need, but even these are running out.
We are trying to find a tent to stay in. There are no tents available. There is a serious problem with housing. We ask the authorities for help.
The authorities have their work cut out for them. It will take years to rebuild the battered nations.
Vantage continues after a short break.
Balloon being shot down. China claimed that the United States is using armed force to bring down the balloon, and that is an excessive reaction. It expressed strong discontent and protest against the U.S. action. The Chinese have also accused the United States of violating international norms by shooting down the balloon, but made no mention of the violation of international law. China has also said it would defend its legitimate rights and the interests of the enterprise involved, which could help it make the case that the government was not directly involved in launching this balloon. China has also refused a conversation with U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. In his State of the Union address, U.S. President Joe Biden made a reference to this Chinese balloon episode.
I'm committed to work with China where we can advance American interests and benefit the world, but make no mistake about it. As we made clear last week, if China threatens our sovereignty, we will act to protect our country, and we did.
Now, according to the United States, China's fleet of spy balloons have targeted several countries, including India. As per the Washington Post, the surveillance balloon effort has operated for several years now, partly out of the Hainan province, which is in the southern coast of China. They have collected information on military assets in other countries and areas of emerging strategic interest to China, including the Indo-Pacific, India, Japan, and of course the thorny issue of Taiwan. These surveillance airships are operated in part by the People's Liberation Army. They have been spotted over at least 5 continents. They are part of China's fleet of balloons developed to conduct surveillance operations, and they have violated the sovereignty of other countries apart from the United States.
Now let's talk about the crisis at the Adani Group, still unraveling. In recent days, Adani has tried to ease pressure. The company will pay off some loans early, loans worth $1.1 billion, and this has helped. Some of the bleeding has stopped, but the row is far from over. It has spilled into the Indian Parliament. Yesterday, Congress MP Rahul Gandhi attacked the government. He questioned Prime Minister Modi's links to Gautam Adani, the chairman of the Adani Group. Today, the Prime Minister responded.
इतनी बड़ी भयंकर महामारी, बटा हुआ विश्व, युद्ध के कारण हो रहे विनाश, अनेकों देशों में अस्थिरता का माहौल है। ऐसे समय में भी देश दुनिया की 5वीं बड़ी अर्थव्यवस्था बना है। आज पूरे विश्व में भारत को लेकर के पॉजिटिविटी है, एक आशा है, भरोसा है।
And we haven't heard the last of this. India will have an election next year, and this political debate will only intensify in the weeks and months ahead. But tonight, we do not want to dwell on the politics. We want to talk about the economy. Will the Adani rout impact the India growth story? To answer this, let's put some basics on the table first. Adani is a private group. Adani stocks do not represent the Indian stock market. India has 2 main exchanges, the Bombay Stock Exchange, or the BSE, and the National Stock Exchange, or the NSE. Now let's look at how Adani is doing on both these exchanges. Before the crisis, Adani shares accounted for more than 6% on the BSE and the NSE. Now they've dropped to 3%. In both cases, Adani's share was in single digits. So while they've fallen significantly, the impact on the larger stock market will be limited. Those who bought Adani stocks have definitely seen losses. Their portfolios are in the red, but the rest should be fine. What about the money of small investors, people like you and me? A lot has been said about the exposure of banks and institutions, especially state-owned entities like the State Bank of India, SBI, and Life Insurance Corporation of India, or LIC. Both have exposure to Adani stocks. What does that mean? It means that they put their money, and by extension our money, into Adani stocks. Banks like the SBI have lent money to the Adani Group. This money is the one that comes through fixed deposits. It's our money. And LIC has invested in Adani shares. Again, this is money that belongs to investors. This money belongs to people who buy LIC saving schemes. So here's a question that a lot of people are asking. Are all these investments at risk? Let me bring you an assessment by experts. Global credit ratings agency Moody's shared a report. I have a copy. This is what it says. And I'm quoting from Moody's. We estimate that their exposures to Adani are not more than 1% of their total loans. While we estimate that the exposures are larger for public sector banks than for private sector banks, they are smaller than 1% of total loans for most banks. 1%. That is the exposure. That's how much LIC and SBI will be affected, 1%. LIC's investment in Adani stands at 0.975%. It's not even 1%. So at least on this front, there isn't much to worry about. But what about the big picture? What about the Indian economy? India's finance minister has spoken about this. Let me quote from Nirmala Sitharaman. Foreign exchange reserve in the last 2 days has gone up by $8 billion. Neither our macroeconomic fundamentals nor our economy's image have been affected. And you could say she's part of the government. Of course, she'll say this, and you'd be right. So we also looked at what industry stalwarts are saying. Veteran banker Uday Kotak says he doesn't see any quote-unquote systemic risk to the Indian financial system. Industrialist Anand Mahindra has advised, never ever bet against India, he said. India Inc. sounds upbeat, but that is not to say that there's nothing to worry about. There are some obvious concerns, like what happens to the projects run by the Adani group? Will their operations be affected? What about new investments? Will they slow down? Will expansion plans be put on hold? Gautam Adani says nothing will be impacted.
We will continue to focus on timely executions and delivery of projects. The fundamentals of our company are very strong. Our balance sheet is healthy and assets robust. Our EBITDA levels and cash flows have been very strong, and we have an impeccable track record of fulfilling our debt obligations.
But this story is no longer just about Adani. It has also cast a spotlight on Indian regulators like SEBI, the Securities and Exchange Board of India, SEBI. SEBI is India's main market regulator. It has an important role to play in keeping the markets calm. It has to protect investors. It has to ensure that the law is followed. SEBI's reputation cannot be put at risk because when it comes to regulation, reputation is everything. It drives trust in the Indian markets and in the Indian system. And trust is what foreign investors look for when they put their money in India. So while the larger impact on the economy may be limited, the world is watching how SEBI navigates this crisis. India's first homemade aircraft carrier was in the news this week. It is called INS Vikrant. A naval variant of India's Tejas light combat aircraft landed on this carrier. It was a milestone for the Indian Navy. It brings the carrier one step closer to becoming fully operational. Meanwhile, India's other aircraft carrier, the INS Vikramaditya, is expected to be back in action soon. So by the end of this year, India should have 2 battle-ready aircraft carriers patrolling the seas. And this is very significant for India to project its military might in the Indo-Pacific. Our next report explains what this means for India and the region. The Tejas has landed. In a landmark moment for the Indian Navy, a combat aircraft landed on a made-in-India aircraft carrier, the INS Vikrant. And the cherry on the top? The Tejas light combat aircraft was also indigenously built. It's a big boost to Prime Minister Modi's Make in India initiative and a shot in the arm for the Indian Navy. The INS Vikrant is still undergoing trials. It is expected to become fully operational by the end of this year. India has 2 aircraft carriers, the INS Vikrant and the INS Vikramaditya. INS Vikrant is homemade, designed and built in India. INS Vikramaditya was bought from Russia, a former Soviet carrier which India commissioned in 2013. It has been out of action for the last 2 years, undergoing repairs. Once both of them are ready, India will have 2 aircraft carriers patrolling the seas. Why do we need 2? Because the threat from China is rising. China has been very aggressive in the neighborhood. It is building facilities in the Indian Ocean, putting together what's come to be called the string of pearls. It's a string of military bases that encircle India and give China vantage points in the region. China's first overseas base was in Djibouti in the Horn of Africa. Then it got Hambantota in Sri Lanka and Gwadar in Pakistan, among others. Beijing is also modernizing its navy. It has the world's largest fleet. China is building what's known as a blue water navy. What's a blue water navy? One that can operate across the world, that can mobilize quickly using bases in every region. The Indian Ocean is on China's target, which is why the Indian Navy needs to be prepared. China has been using its navy to throw its weight around. It did this with Taiwan, constant live fire drills and incursions to build pressure on Taipei. China uses gunboat diplomacy to settle disputes. It has disputes with most of its neighbors on who owns which islands. China is at loggerheads with Japan, Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, and the Philippines. It uses its navy to intimidate all these countries. Last year, India objected when a Chinese ship docked in Sri Lanka. India said it was a spy ship. China denied the charge and proceeded to dock the ship at Sri Lanka's Hambantota port. This is a port Colombo has leased to Beijing for 99 years. China has 3 aircraft carriers. Though it hasn't sent any to the Indian Ocean yet, it is expected to do so in the next few years. Ties between India and China have been at historic lows since 2020, with China trying to push its troops into Indian territory in the Himalayas. India needs to calibrate its defenses to keep an aggressive China in check, and a key part of that is keeping the Indian Ocean safe. India is part of the Quad grouping with the US, Australia, and Japan to push back against Chinese influence in the Indo-Pacific. While the other 3 nations will keep China at bay in the Indo-Pacific, it will fall upon India to guard the Indian Ocean. And that's where the 2 aircraft carriers become essential. INS Vikramaditya has historically kept an eye on Pakistan in the Arabian Sea. Now the Bay of Bengal and waters around Sri Lanka need to be patrolled too. With the 2 carriers operating simultaneously, the Indian Navy will be better equipped to project its military might. In the United Kingdom, the headlines don't look encouraging. A slowing economy, a cost of living crisis, massive strikes, a controversial immigration plan, and now they're talking about the real estate market. It's struggling. Demand is weak. Citizens don't have the money to spend on housing, but others are buying. The spotlight today is on who owns property in the UK. And we're talking about overseas entities. That's always been a mystery. Shell companies, shady foreign entities have poured money in the UK. They've made Britain the hub of illicit cash. So houses are being sold without any trace of the actual owner. How many companies are we talking about? More than 18,000 as per the latest estimate. 18,000 companies pouring black money into Britain's real estate market. How many properties do these anonymous investors own? More than 52,000. No sign of who the owners are for these properties. And here's the interesting part. Many of these belong to Russians, the Kremlin, and people close to it. Sample this. The 52,000 properties have a combined worth of £6.7 billion, out of which around £1.5 billion was pumped by Russia. Mostly rich, influential businessmen believed to be close to President Vladimir Putin. They put all this money. And what does this tell you? Russian oligarchs continue to own lavish properties in Britain right under the government's nose. That's despite all the sanctions that London slapped on Moscow. And this trend is not new. Of Russians owning big properties in the UK, it's been happening for a while. Take the case of Roman Abramovich, a wealthy Russian businessman and former owner of the Chelsea Football Club. At one point, he owned property worth more than £250 million. £250 million, including 70 homes, buildings and pieces of land in the heart of England. Was London aware of this? Of course it was. Did it do something to tackle it? Not quite. Let's rewind a bit. Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022. The United Kingdom, under Boris Johnson, he was Prime Minister then, imposed sanctions. Sanctions on Russian oligarchs. It said the businessmen were responsible for funding Putin's invasion. In fact, let me quote what UK Foreign Secretary James Cleverly said last year. Putin continues to rely on his cabal of selected elite to maintain control of his industrial complex and fuel his illegal invasion of Ukraine. By targeting these individuals, we are ramping up the economic pressure on Putin and will continue to do so until Ukraine prevails. London introduced a law soon after Russia's invasion. It was called the Register of Overseas Entities. The idea was quite simple. Foreign companies that own property in the UK have to disclose details of who the owner is, and they have to disclose it publicly. And here's how it panned out. There are 32,000 foreign companies as per the UK's records. They own more than 90,000 properties. Guess how many abided by this rule? Only 21,000. How many Russians made it to the list? Only 4. Let's dig deeper. The registry required these companies to reveal the name of the actual person owning it. Instead, companies chose to exploit a loophole, one that allowed them to skirt the disclosure through trusts. 10,000 of them named a different trust as their owner. Around 2,000 said they don't even have an owner, and some companies did not even bother to file a reply. The purpose was clearly defeated. The UK's aim to find more Russian oligarchs who own property in England fell flat. The failure of this legislation was on full display, and since then, London has remained mum. It has remained silent on its failure to flush out illegal funds. Maybe this could make for a good documentary sometime in the future. When was the last time you straightened your hair? If you have curly hair, visits to the salon must be a regular affair. But do you know what's being put in your hair? And how safe is it? It's a tangly question, and it has now reached the courts. Do your hair products cause cancer? L'Oreal and subsidiaries of India-based companies Godrej and Dabur are being sued. These are household names, and they face a combined proceeding in Chicago. 57 lawsuits have been filed. Their hair relaxer products are under the scanner. These products might be causing cancer. What's worse, the lawsuits say these companies knew about this, they knew about the dangerous chemicals in their products, but they sold them anyway. Hair relaxers are products used to permanently straighten hair, and they're mostly used by and marketed to black women. But the dangers of these products are not new. So why the sudden furor? And why do women use them despite knowing some of the risks? Our next report tells you.
L'Oreal and subsidiaries of Godrej and Dabur are in a hairy problem. Pardon the pun. At least 57 lawsuits have been filed against them. They face a combined proceeding in Chicago. Their hair relaxer products have been accused of causing cancer. First things first, what is a hair relaxer? It's a type of lotion or cream. It's generally applied to tight curls to straighten them with ease. It's mostly bought by and marketed to curly-haired and black women. So what's the case? The charge against these companies is quite simple. Plaintiffs say they knew their products contained dangerous chemicals, but they kept selling them. What about the companies? What's their response? They've so far denied the allegations. L'Oreal says these lawsuits have no legal merit. By the way, hair relaxer products have been around for more than 100 years. The modern avatars have been selling for decades. So why the sudden furor? Because of a new study. It was published in October last year. The lawsuit is based on the findings of the study. It says that women using these products multiple times a year were over twice as likely to develop uterine cancer. Meaning, women using hair relaxers are more at risk of this cancer. Uterine cancer is not reported in large numbers in India, but it's the most common cancer in American women, and the fourth most common cancer among women in the UK. That's not all. A 2021 study reveals that hair relaxers may also be causing breast cancer. This study talks about women using these products several times a year for over 15 years. Their cancer risk goes up by 30%. Here's something else worth noting: race and cancer risk. Black women tend to have the highest rate of cancer before the age of 40. They also have curly hair and are the biggest market for hair relaxers. Experts see a link between hair products and cancer. But why are black women overrepresented in this market? For centuries, their hair has been discriminated against. Their hair textures are called inferior and undesirable. So much so that 20 states in the US have passed the Crown Act. It's a law that makes hair discrimination illegal. You need a law to stop discrimination on the basis of hair. That's saying something. For the longest time, beauty standards have been biased to the white skin. Golden hair, lighter skin, so you have creams that promise to make you fairer and lotions that promise to fix your hair. And women and men embracing treatments despite the risks they pose. What's worse, little is being done to stop this. Governments and corporations haven't done enough for the safety and health of consumers. So women themselves are taking action. Relaxer sales declined in the last 10 years, from $71 million in 2011 to $30 million in 2021. And if the women behind these lawsuits prevail, it could have a vast impact on the so-called hair care industry.
And finally, I want to talk about pronouns. Don't worry, this is not an English class. It's a story of our times. She, her, he, him, they, them. What am I talking about? Commonly used gender pronouns, something we all learnt in primary school. But what about them, they, theirs? Or ze, here? Well, they're gender-neutral pronouns because gender is no longer a binary, we're told. It's a spectrum. And now it is considered polite to ask people their preferred pronoun. So if you hear pronouns like they, them, theirs, do not be confused. These are common gender-neutral pronouns. What exactly are they? It's when people don't want to identify with either of the binary pronouns, he or she. And they can be used to refer to a single person. Ze, here are pronouns used by the trans community. And some people prefer not to use pronouns at all, substituting their names for pronouns. How does that work? I'll give you an example. Anu is watching Vantage because Anu is a student and Anu is keen to understand international affairs. No pronouns. But back to pronouns. They've been expanded to include more people. But what about God and his pronoun? Well, God is keeping up with the times and is about to go gender neutral. The Church of England is mulling whether to stop referring to God as he. This comes after some priests asked for it. They wanted to be allowed to use gender-neutral terms while talking of God. 2 commissions appointed by the Church of England will deliberate on this matter this spring. And any change would need the approval of the Synod, the Church's decision-making body. Gender justice campaigners have welcomed this move, but there are some hurdles. First of all, what happens to that prayer, Our Father? It is the central Christian prayer where Jesus instructed his followers to say together. As expected, traditionalists are not thrilled about the possibility of changes. Some say such a move would be seen as an abandonment of the Church's own doctrine. Reverend Dr. Ian Paul told a news outlet, and I'm quoting, "The fact that God is called Father can't be substituted by Mother without changing the meaning, nor can it be gender neutralized to parent without the loss of meaning." But the Church of England says it has been exploring for years the use of gendered language vis-a-vis God. A spokesperson for the Church said, and I'm quoting, "This is nothing new. Christians have recognized since ancient times that God is neither male nor female. Yet the variety of ways of addressing and describing God found in Scripture has not always been reflected in our worship." Scottish denominations have already moved away from referring to God as he, but not everyone likes the idea. Critics say this is a perfect example of being too woke. What's woke? A term that is used to signify being more aware politically and socially. Last week, I told you about how the UK is facing a non-religious future. According to the census data of 2021, most people under the age of 40 in England and Wales say that they have no religion. And for the first time ever, Christianity is no longer a majority religion in either of these two places. There is pressure on the Church to reach out to the young and modernize its ways to keep up the appeal. But is this really the way? Because it seems even God hasn't been spared in this crisis of faith in the UK, because as the country is at risk of losing its religion, God is at risk of losing his pronoun. And to expect the faithfuls to go from our Father to our non-gendered parent in heaven would be quite a leap of faith. Many may not be willing to take it. We'll see how this plays out. And now it's time to wrap up with Vantage shots, images that tell the story. Have you heard about murmuration? It happens when hundreds, sometimes thousands of birds fly in coordinated patterns. They stick together to keep the predators away. It's a sight to behold, probably a lesson for us humans. We have a video of murmuration for you from the UK. Meanwhile, in Brazil, people are preparing for a famous carnival parade, and preparations are just as exciting as the parade itself. Remember the movie Titanic? There is an ongoing debate about whether Jack could fit on the door with Rose before he died. We don't know for sure, but filmmaker James Cameron tried to find answers. See the clip and decide for yourself. And finally, here's something more exciting than the Super Bowl, the Puppy Bowl. Team Ruff and Team Fluff competing for the trophy. We're ending the show on a pawsome note, we say. Thank you for watching. See you tomorrow.
Adani showing us their signature pump-to-pump coverage defense, led by Ritz. Vivian can't get any separation.
Steve, Da Vinci's feet were on fire after that last play, and he's trying to cool those puppies off.
Hello and welcome to the late night edition with me, Ayushman Singh Jamwal. Breaking news coming in from Ghaziabad. The leopard that attacked and injured 9 people at the Ghaziabad district court has now been captured. The big cat was tranquilized and caught in a joint operation of the police and the forest department. That's the piece of breaking news that's coming in. Those visuals on your screen where the entire dramatic capture operation took place today, where a leopard roamed into the Ghaziabad district court complex and attacked 9 people. 9 people have been injured and they are receiving medical treatment. But now what we are learning is that that leopard has been captured. It was tranquilized and captured in a joint operation of the police as well as the forest department. I'm joined by my colleague Akash on the phone line to get the latest details. Akash, what more are you learning from the authorities?
So, Ayushman, first of all, this is for our viewers that this was very unusual incident. It was a routine court time when at around 4 p.m. this leopard suddenly arrived at the first floor of the building in Ghaziabad District Court. And, after hours of joint operation carried out by police and the forest department, finally they have got control over this big cat. But before that, this leopard has injured at least 9 people. Also, we are learning that at around 8 p.m., the teams captured the animal. No one knows exactly that where the leopard came from, but the relieving part is that no one is seriously injured and many of them have been discharged, in fact, from the hospital. Also, the leopard is safe. We have been told that all the necessary protocols will be followed and a call will be taken after that.
Right. Thank you, Akash, for getting us that piece of breaking news. So now what we are learning is that that leopard has been captured in a joint operation of the police and the forest department. 9 people have been injured and they are receiving medical treatment. We'll continue to track all the developments which are coming in. A very startling case coming in from Ghaziabad. But let's shift focus to the fireworks which took place in Parliament today, ladies and gentlemen. After Rahul Gandhi's direct attack against the Modi government over the Adani matter, in a speech that lasted over 1 hour, the Prime Minister tore into the opposition, accusing the parties of peddling politics of hatred and lies to derail the government's achievements. He blamed the opposition of compulsive criticism, accusing it of failing to digest India's growth story under the BJP, citing the decisive mandates from state to national elections. He added that targeting India's rise, insulting agencies and the forces has not helped the opposition even once in turning the tide against the BJP, and in fact, they should appreciate the Enforcement Directorate for politically uniting them. The Prime Minister once again highlighted the UPA government from 2004 to 2014, calling it the era of scams, terror attacks and India's global weakness. In an emphatic message to the opposition, the Prime Minister said he works for the Indian Parivar and the faith of 140 crore Indians in him will remain his Suraksha Kavach. Now, Rahul Gandhi missed the first half of the speech and his absence was not lost on the Prime Minister, who in a veiled attack quipped that he may not have woken up